Welcome to Work Life Law with attorney Kate Cerrone. On this episode, how the government shutdown is affecting real estate transactions and what to do about it. The federal government shut down on October 1st. What are the most immediate concerns for Northeast Connecticut home buyers and sellers?
Lenders will often require you to validate and prove your income, and they will always ask for your IRS tax transcripts. If you happen to have them and they are, you have filed them away and they're signed and you can prove that they were submitted as the tax return, you may be able to submit those in lieu of requesting them from the Internal Revenue Service. The Internal Revenue Service was already operating on a low staff level, and now there will have workers that are furloughed, so their processing is going to be very slow. Now, the reason I bring that up is that if you are a seller and you have a lien on your home due to unpaid federal taxes, you can pay that off at closing, or you can pay it off ahead of closing, and you need a payoff and release from the IRS in order to do that. So those will be delayed. So it may be that if you are in a closing and you have a federal lien on your property, you may be able to work with the buyer and get an agreement to close and to perhaps hold the amount of tax in escrow until that payoff or the release can actually be obtained. So there are situations where you can close over certain issues because you know that they will be taken care of post-closing. So that's something to work closely with your attorney to see if that's possible, because maybe you don't have to delay your closing at all.
What should first-time home buyers expecting FHA financing know?
So if you are a buyer and you are going for a federally backed or insured loan, or a loan that's funded in part by a federal grant, the processing times will be a lot longer because the workers are furloughed. So, for example, an FHA loan, that is something that a lot of people are familiar with. It offers lower down payments for home buyers and can also have very attractive interest rates. And it's especially attractive for first-time home buyers. So the question may be, during a government shutdown, should you even apply for an FHA loan? If you're not in a time constraint to close, I recommend that you still apply for that FHA lending. Although the federal government is shut down, the FHA is expected to continue to endorse these single-family FHA mortgages. So you may get a mortgage contingency in your purchase and sale agreement. So just pay attention to the timing on that. You may just want to ahead of time request a little more time for processing and make sure that the person who's selling the house understands the type of financing that you are going for. The savings sometimes compared to a traditional loan, compared to an FHA loan, can save you so much money and can really provide a lot of savings over the life of the loan if the interest rate is lower. So my advice is to still look into that particular lending.
What advice would you give veterans closing on homes right now?
During the federal government shutdown, the VA is prioritizing programs that don't involve lending because they also do homelessness services, they do suicide prevention, they do caregiver support. The VA has been clear that they will be giving those programs priority. However, they're not suspending their processing of the VA loans. So again, good to look into that lending. Don't discount it during a federal government shutdown, but just plan on longer processing times.
USDA rural housing loans have stopped completely with no new guarantees or processing. What advice do you have for rural buyers in Northeast Connecticut who are hoping to utilize that program?
The USDA's rural housing programs rely on annual appropriations from Congress. So that has been entirely suspended. So in a government shutdown, these appropriations are not happening, any new appropriations. However, if you are in the middle of the processing of a USDA loan, it's a good chance that your funding has already been secured. So you may get some delayed processing times, but chances are your USDA rural housing loan will still go through. But new applications for the USDA programs are suspended during the shutdown. So if you have a brand new application, you may be turned away.
I understand the National Flood Insurance Program also expired on September 30th, and so cannot issue any new policies or renewals right now. What does this mean for buyers in flood zones?
When purchasing a property in a special flood hazard area, and the way that you find out if your property is in those areas is you look at the FEMA maps. And if the FEMA map indicates that you are in a special flood hazard area, then if you are going through a lender, some private lenders, but all federally regulated lenders require that the borrower obtain flood insurance before closing. So a lot of people get the best rates from the National Flood Insurance Program, and that is provided by the federal government. So new policies and renewals from the NFIP will be delayed during the shutdown. When purchasing property in a flood zone, you may be able to obtain insurance from a private insurance company, but you have to make sure that that policy meets the federal lending and agency requirements. So my advice, again, is to plan ahead. So if you are a seller and you know you are in a flood zone, try to do your research to see perhaps if your existing policy may be transferred. If you are a buyer, look very early on as to whether the property that you are interested in is in a flood zone, and try to work with the other party to see if you can problem solve this requirement for flood insurance.
What's your biggest piece of advice for anyone trying to buy, sell, or close on property during the shutdown?
So my biggest piece of advice for anyone trying to buy, sell, or close on property during this shutdown is that this is not a market where things will happen quickly. If you are scheduling a closing that's affected by timing, you need to work with your attorney and your realtor from day one of the process. Sellers, don't line up that moving truck quite yet. You need to understand if your mortgage is federally insured, and if it is, you will need to anticipate a delay in getting that payoff amount before you can close. Avoid a chaotic closing experience by planning well in advance and expecting delays. Hopefully, you will be pleasantly surprised when your attorney can coordinate the closing with minimal impact to you and your family.
The information presented is not intended to be legal advice. You should consult an attorney for advice regarding your individual situation.